Good morning, everyone. I'm Byron Barnett from WHDH TV 7 News, and I'd like to welcome you to what I believe will be an important and hopefully enlightening discussion on a topic that's moved to the forefront of our national conversation: structural racism. Now, this morning we have a terrific panel lined up to talk about how structural racism impacts health, public safety, education, jobs, housing, and other aspects of our society and communities. I'll be moderating. Our panelists will take on the questions of where do we go from here and how can everyone be an ally? Now, before we get to our panel, I'd like to make a couple of personal reflections. I said at the top that the subject of structural racism has moved to the forefront of our national conversation. But among African Americans, structural or systemic racism has always been front and center as a topic in our lives. And speaking for myself, as a great grandson of slaves, I can say, other than my parents and my family, nothing has had a bigger impact on shaping my life as a Black American than systemic or structural racism. Now, some of you know my hometown is Minneapolis, Minnesota. The police department you saw burning on TV is in my childhood neighborhood. Minneapolis is a fabulous city in many ways, a great city, but it's also an American city. As a Black boy, a teenager, and a young Black man, I too suffered indignities at the hands of the Minneapolis police. Couple of quick stories. When I was 11 years old, I was in a hardware store with a white friend who got caught stealing an inexpensive item. I stole nothing. The police were called. I ended up with a police record that followed me for years. My white friend, however, did not. Then when I was about 20, I was driving through a white neighborhood late at night when a white police officer pulled me over and searched all through my car, my trunk, everything. Now, I'd been in college a couple of years and I knew he had no right to do this, but I also knew if I objected to that officer who was armed with a gun, things could have easily escalated into something much more serious and even deadly. Now, the reason I bring all this up is I was pretty much a goody two-shoes as a kid, but as a Black man, or even a Black boy, you don't have to go looking for trouble because that kind of trouble finds you. And every Black man knows it. I've talked to Black police officers who tell me when they take off their uniforms, they get followed in stores as well. White parents would be horrified if some of these things were happening to their kids, but in our case, we sarcastically call it the Black tax. And finally, one of the sentiments I hear going around in Black circles now is this: the idea that we, as in Black Americans, are not going back to the way things were just a few weeks ago, now that so many of us are suddenly awake. After all, what's happened this year, we are now seeing things with 20/20 vision. Okay, now on to our distinguished panel. Let me introduce them, starting with Somerville Mayor Joe Curtatone, who recently made history by declaring racism a public health and safety emergency in the city of Somerville. Mayor Curtatone is also the official host of today's panel discussion. We thank him for that. First-term Massachusetts Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, who swept into office in a stunning upset and has been making waves in Congress ever since. She's the first woman of color elected to the Massachusetts congressional delegation. Next, we have Suffolk County District Attorney Rachel Rollins, also in her first term, and the state's first female district attorney. Rachel Rollins campaigned on a platform of criminal justice reform and a promise of creating a more equitable criminal justice system for people of color. Suffolk County Sheriff Steve Tompkins, now in his 7th year in office. Tompkins has focused on vocational training and innovative reentry programs for inmates, as well as youth violence and crime prevention programs in schools. We also have the Honorable Yvonne Spicer, the current mayor of Framingham and the first African-American woman elected to the office of mayor in the Commonwealth. And we have Somerville City Councilor Will Mbah, who immigrated from Cameroon, West Africa in 2010, became a citizen in 2015, and is now serving in his second term on the Somerville City Council. And Somerville School Committee member, Andre Green. Now, he's currently a nonprofit management consultant with 20 years experience working to end intergenerational poverty and helping organizations pursue racial justice internally and externally. And finally, to help us with the youth perspective, Floreisha Bastien, who just graduated from Somerville High School, where she served as the Black Student Union president. Born and raised in Somerville, she plans to attend Brandeis University in the fall. She says her favorite pastime is working with youth and community engagement. Thank you all for participating in this very important and I hope enlightening discussion. Well, first of all, I'd like to turn to throw the first question to Representative Pressley. Representative, now you've been fighting for many of these same issues since your days on the Boston City Council. Now that systemic racism, structural racism, is part of the national conversation, where do you think our focus should be?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you, Byron, for moderating this. Thank you to our mayor and Floreisha for bringing us all together, and to those whom you referred to as our distinguished panelists. I have the honor of calling them not only my colleagues, but dear friends, and so I'm delighted to join you today. And I would also just say that since I've been Black my whole life, I didn't begin this work when I was elected to the Boston City Council, and certainly, to your point, not to Congress. I was raised by a community organizer, community activist, tenants' rights organizer, and my mother made sure I knew that in addition to the beauty, the brilliance, the resilience of what it was to be Black, that I was also being born into a struggle, and that work of our having a full liberation and emancipation would be work from cradle to grave, and that I was expected to do it. And so, since I've been Black my whole life, I've been doing this work my whole life. Now, what I would say is that the struggle has been ongoing. It has been ongoing for centuries. And so the fights are not new, but this is a new moment. And I'm so inspired by Floreisha and the many young people who are at the fore of what is a multi-generational, multiracial movement, and by those who have in the past been allies who seek to be accomplices in and being anti-racist in dismantling structural racism. So what do we mean when we say structural racism? How I define that is hate, hurt, and harm that has been legislated, again, codified by law, and is so pervasive, it is so systemic that you cannot escape it when it comes to education, healthcare, housing, our criminal legal system. It is structural and it is systemic, and you cannot escape it, because the disproportionate hate, hurt, and harm that Black folks have experienced was hoisted upon us. It was very precise. And so now, and that's from the original sin and the bondage of slavery to unequal access to the GI Bill, to Jim Crow, to the war on drugs, to redlining. And so in this moment, again, these are old fights. This is a new moment. And this is a reckoning. This is a tipping point. There will be unrest in our streets for as long as there is unrest in Black lives. And the most recent murders of unarmed Black men and women at the hands of those sworn to serve and to protect was the tipping point. But people are not only in the streets because of police brutality. There is unrest in Black lives, and so there's unrest in our streets across every issue. And so we seek to actively be anti-racist, to dismantle structural racism, and to legislate healing and justice in the same way that legislated hurt and harm was put upon our communities. And so for me, that's everything from ending qualified immunity, which I've introduced legislation to do that. There can never be real justice for these families, because true justice would be their loved ones would still be with us. There, however, must be accountability, and that has evaded those police officers who have operated with callous impunity and disregard for human life, for Black and brown bodies. We appreciate when chiefs recognize their failures and resign, and when officers are fired, but that isn't justice. And because of these protections put forth by the Supreme Court and then codified in court case after court case, families have not been able to have retribution, consequence, or justice. Lawyers have that, doctors have that, right? You have a recourse. Malpractice, when there's negligence or civil rights are violated, you have a recourse. And so behavior won't change for as long as there are no consequences. So ending qualified immunity is one thing that I would lift in the space of accountability. And then from an economic justice standpoint, I would cite something, because again, it's so structural and so systemic, like canceling student debt. Black students borrow and default more than anyone else because our families have been denied the opportunity to build generational wealth. And not only post-COVID, I don't see how we have a comprehensive economic recovery without canceling student debt, but this is a racial justice issue. The average Black student borrower is saddled with a minimum $30,000 worth of debt. So I see canceling student debt as reparations and also racial justice. So I would lift just those two quick examples, but there are many legislative ones that I could enumerate.
Representative Pressley, the way you describe how this systemic racism, structural racism, has just seeped into every part of our lives, that many people who are not people of color might not understand. All of these, one of the things that people hear people talking about is how all of the laws, we're a nation of laws, but all of the laws were written by white people. Black people were certainly not at the table when all of these laws were written. I'd like to, and you mentioned the word allies. Yeah. I'd like to just kind of expand on that a little bit. Mayor Curtatone. Mayor, you're the only white person on the panel here. And I was wondering what you think when it comes to allies, what role should whites be playing as allies in addressing structural racism?
Well, thanks. First, Byron, it's an honor to be part of this distinguished panel of leaders and advocates and activists. I see my role as a white, progressive human being and elected official as one being a listener, a good listener, and fighting to empower the voices that have been silenced or really pushed down for as long as we've been a nation. And I think it's important that people like me in position of power not only listen, but hear what is being said. And that when we set the table, first we want to commit ourselves to own the work as an ally, as a white ally, but we want to make sure that when we set the table for conversation and work, we don't dictate who's at the table, how that should be arranged. And that's something many of us, people like me, are ignorant of. And I'm reminded by that by some people on this call that we need to continue to be a good listener. We need to commit ourselves to the deep work that has to happen. The killing of George Floyd and so many other Black Americans are a symptom of a deeper problem, a very deep disease that has been infecting our nation and our society for as long as we've been a nation. And the Congresswoman has set that and outlined it gracefully. And what we need to recognize is that that work is something we all own. But in owning that work, we need to elevate and amplify the voices that continue to be and suppressed by a system. So I see my role as a white ally in the fight for as anti-racist as being a listener, but hearing and owning the work alongside with the people who've really been silenced this whole time. Those stories, your stories, Byron, that you share with me, that we hear, strike at my core. And I hope that And I believe most people have a sense of shame. And when we see the lynching of George Floyd recorded, and you know, I mean, it should really spark a sense of shame in every American, especially white America, you know, and understand that we are not doing good by our fellow Americans, by Black Americans, by brown Americans. And I'll say to all of you and all those listening who are Black or brown, I am sorry. And I need to do better by you. And as a white ally, that's what I need to commit myself to, is to do better by you, by listening, by hearing, and not dictating what that work should be. Those voices who should be amplified and elevated will tell us what that work should be.
Thank you, Mayor. Suffolk District Attorney Rachel Rollins. You ran on a platform of criminal justice reform. You won, of course, but you've taken a lot of heat from critics. Do you feel like the killing of George Floyd and the aftermath has validated what you've been fighting for?
So I would love to have Mr. Floyd back with us, and would never take a position where I was grateful about anything regarding, and thank you, Mayor, his lynching, which by definition that absolutely was. I will say just a few points before I answer that, though, Byron, is that Black people, we are the most culturally appropriated people on the planet. When you look around to every other culture, any woman you know who is putting on bronzer or plumping her lips or adding roundness in places where they are flat and deficient, that is all us, right? We are also the only group of people on the planet that get blamed for our murder, and we have to explain somehow as a result of being killed. So I think, as my Congresswoman has said, we are in a moment now and we have a reckoning. You are absolutely right, Byron. Before even George Floyd and this latest batch of murders of Black people, and women included, of course, when COVID-19 hit, every police department implemented my list of 15, right? When I ran on this policy and said, in the first instance, these low-level, non-violent, non-serious crimes, let's go to the root cause and not put them in Sheriff Tompkins' care, and good care, by the way, but care nonetheless. Let's not spend $55,000 in taxpayer money to send them to the Suffolk County House of Correction. Let's look at the underlying problem. Every police department across the nation said when COVID-19 hit, we're not going to interact with communities for low-level, non-serious crimes. We're going to issue tickets. We're going to let them know by summons that in a couple months when courts open, we'll see you then. So COVID-19 proved that this is what I was saying all along, number one. Number two, you hit on a very good point. My list of 15 is set up because poor communities, Black communities, and brown communities have too many interactions with the police. Far too many, right? If you woke up in Wellesley one day, if any of you live there, and all of your police officers were Black, and there were metal detectors in your school, and your kids were FIO'd and stopped every day on the way to school, that would last for about an hour in Wellesley before the governor showed up and the National Guard, and everything was changed instantly. But somehow our communities have to deal with that. George Floyd was murdered. He was tried, convicted, sentenced, and executed in 8 minutes and 46 seconds for a counterfeit $20 bill, Byron. That's a misdemeanor, even in places like Alabama and your wonderful Minnesota, right? It's a misdemeanor. He could never have got the death penalty for that alleged crime, but that's in fact what happened. And if police stopped interacting with poor Black and brown communities for low-level, non-serious crimes, which can escalate in an instant, George Floyd would still be alive today. If we had policies whereby police weren't deployed when somebody was potentially intoxicated or having a mental health crisis or engaged in some other behavior, which is a societal failure, not a job for police, which we're asking to do too much, or prosecutors, if we had to deploy community resources to them instead of arresting carceral systems, I think we'd be in a much different situation. But yes, I do believe lots of people, as a result of a global pandemic and the most recent batch of executions of Black people by law enforcement or their proxy, are seeing that the things that I've talked about weren't so crazy after all.
Steve Tompkins, as Suffolk County Sheriff, you're part of the criminal justice system. As a Black man, how are you dealing with this revolt against the criminal justice system? And also, maybe you could talk a little bit about what we can do about dealing with mental health and addiction. I know that's something you can do with on the front end to slow the rate of these folks being incarcerated, because you have to deal with it on the back end.
Well, let me say this to you first and foremost. I want to go back to your opening where I think you said that Black folk are now suddenly awake. I'm not sure if you meant Black people.
No, I meant everyone. Many, not Black folks. I'm talking about other people.
Okay, well, I'm talking about white people. Okay, I'm not talking about the rest of us because we've been awake a long time. Tried 400 years. White people are awake.
401.
You got it. You see? So when you talk about the revolt against the system, and I've said this before, and some of you have probably heard this, 401 years ago, when Africans were ripped from their country and brought all around the world and brought to what now is America, they didn't come as immigrants looking for a better station in life. They didn't come as indentured servants, having the ability to buy their way out of servitude. They came as property. They came as chattel. We were property of other men. And so when you talk about the criminal justice system in its totality, not just in policing, when people say the criminal justice system is broken, when you say the revolt against the criminal justice system isn't broken. The criminal justice system was built to be punitive and oppressive. And so when the power structure acts the way it does, it's because they still see us as their property. And I can move this chair right here wherever I want to in my house because it's my property. And so that's how Black folk, brown folk have been treated. You see, I'm all for peaceful protests. I'm glad to see as many people protesting and marching and speaking out as much as they do, because we need this to happen, but we need this to happen with some consistency. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on that bus in 1955. We didn't get the voting rights bill passed until 1965, some 10 years later. And so what I want to say to people on this call listening to this is that this is going to be a fight that's going to take a while. This is not going to happen in a day, a week, a month, a year, but it will happen because change is here. The pandemic has slowed everything down now and has given everybody a chance to really get their collective heads together and say, we always hear enough is enough. Okay, I got that. But we've always known that enough is enough. Now, white people know enough is enough. White people are saying it. When you have white people flying Black Lives Matter paraphernalia, big change is coming. But we have the worst possible person in the White House at the worst possible time. And he's divisive, and he's getting his people all riled up to act a fool. And so that's what they're going to continue to do. So when you have the congressman down in DC fighting the fight for us, who has always understood the injustices that have been foisted upon people of color, the Black, the brown, the underserved, the overlooked, the poor, and there are a lot of poor white people in this country also. She's fighting. She's that champion that we need. When you have a Mayor Spicer doing what she's doing, when you have a DA like Rachel Rollins, who is like out of this world, a fighter and a champion. And I've been in her company at a number of conferences and the like. And she tells the truth, and she tells it the way it's supposed to be, and she's not dressing it up so that it's going to be received by people in a way that makes them feel better. Mayor Curtatone was speaking to white people feeling the shame of what's going on. Okay, maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but change is here, and change is going to stay. And so, listen, I'll close by saying this. People that are listening to this call, the country is browning. The country is browning. Get with the program, because we're not going away. You're not going away. We're not going away. We're all here. We're all citizens of the globe. So let's stop acting a fool and start acting like we are our brothers and sisters keepers and move this country forward in a way that it should be moved forward as a global citizen.
That's right.
Thank you, Sharon.
Byron, can I say something really quick?
Sure, go ahead. Is that
I
kind
just wanted to just say something about your frame. You said that there is a revolt against the criminal justice system, which I refer to as the criminal injustice system or the criminal legal system. But I think that's a fair frame. But honestly, what we're pushing for right now is a radical reimagining, of our criminal legal system, but of our nation. There is a role for first responders in society. But there is not a role for first responders in every part of society. And guess what, Byron? They don't want to be there. Why are officers administering Narcan? We should be investing, so reimagining. We should be investing in on-demand treatment, in substance use, in trauma-informed care, and culturally competent care. Why are police being called to schools when our children are having altercations or fights? When we know if we invest in social emotional wellness, school nurses, social workers, psychotherapists, this is not, why are our officers being deployed when there is someone battling mental illness and having a challenge, when we should be deploying a mental health clinician? There is a role for the first responder in society, but not in every part of society. So the reckoning is really about a reimagining. And we are seeing a culture shift, but we need to see a power shift. And I want to be really clear. The only receipts I care about are law change, budget change.
Well, you raise a very important point there, because I would agree that this is mostly about economics, money, and power. That's what this has always been about. And people, in my life experience, when you talk about Steve mentioned 1619, slavery, you've mentioned it. When you bring that up, the eyes of white people, they glaze over. Oh, why do you bring that up? I never owned slaves, but this is the whole point. Everything in our society has for us, has started at that point.
That's right.
And continued. It is seeped into everything. As I said before, we weren't sitting at the table making all these laws, but yet we're supposed to follow them. White people have made all the laws without any consideration about, what we're thinking. And I don't think many white folks really understand how deep this all is. When you start talking about it, like I said, their eyes glaze over.
It's true. It's true. But we can't let anybody off the hook, because I don't want to pretend it's just bigoted white folk. The fact that this Congress that I'm in will be voting to make DC a state for the first time is insane. It took us this long to get enough Democratic co-sponsors to vote for DC statehood. So everyone has been complicit in this in some way.
Okay, let's move along to Mayor Spicer. One of the things that has come up here. Are we talking about, is this a moment or is this a movement? I'm just going to throw that out there, and what do you think about that?
First of all, I want to say thank you to my fellow sisters in service. And, and in particularly when I look at all three of us represent some of the first. And we became first over the last 2.5, 3 years, which is indicative of how Massachusetts, our home state, which is supposed to be a progressive state, hasn't moved the needle. So we know that this is not just a moment. This has to be a continuation of the movement that has been going on for quite some time. And every time, when you keep thinking about all of the injustices that have happened, I can tell you, I've been in office for 2.5 years, and even in my own city, there have been many incidents, more than I'd like to enumerate, that have occurred in my city. So it is a constant effort. I do believe this time we all were traumatized. Black, white, brown. We watched for 8 minutes and 46 seconds someone murdered. And we can't erase that as a collective whole. I want to take all of these people that are marching. I want them to march for changes in laws, as our Congresswoman stated, changes in what we do in our practice, our day-to-day practice in work, in schools, in our places of businesses, in hospitals. Every place that we touch how are Black and brown people represented? If not, then what do we do in order to make that change? Because I know in my city, people have asked, what can I do? And I first say, start to educate yourself. You are now awake, educate yourself in a way that pushes this needle much further than it could have ever been pushed. Now, I will say this with all due respect, I don't need thoughts and prayers. What I need is action. I want you to use your power and your privilege as white people to help move the needle forward and not be afraid of that. And that's one of the things I respect about my colleague, Mayor Curtatone. He has used his power and privilege, and I've seen him do it in mayor meetings where he has moved the needle and the conversation to a place that makes a difference. I'm always the only one in the room, the only person of color. That's the story of my life as a science and technology person. That has been the story of my life, being the only one. And as I move this rock uphill called building the new city, I want to build a city that is reflective of what we claim we value, which is diversity. So I have taken some bold actions. Yes, I use my executive power to declare an executive order as racism as a health crisis in the city of Framingham. And now that is just laying the foundation for work that needs to come within our city, and working collectively with all the powers that be, my leadership team, my police department. We have to move this needle, and we have to keep doing this collectively. I am honored to be a part of this panel, but more importantly,
I'm muted.
I am not done with this work. This work continues.
Thank you, Mayor.
Byron, can I just make one statement really quickly?
Go
So
right ahead.
I think I'm not in any way, and you all, I am a Black woman. I'm a biracial woman. My father is Irish and my mom is from the West Indies. But I think Attorney General William Barr, who was in Boston recently, we all know, but also a couple months ago made a statement, history is written by the winners. And I'm not making excuses for white people, but a really good example for them to understand about systemic racism is our education system and how we aren't taught truthfully about the fact that we aren't slaves, we were enslaved, right? We were a vibrant, dominant, exceptional people, just like we are. And quite frankly, the resilience we have shown with the levels of, and this is a family show, so you can add the word, you know what, shoveled on us every day, that we still show up and shine and glow and are exceptional in every way possible, I think speaks volumes about how amazing our culture is. But we aren't taught appropriately in schools. If you read the Globe, there was just a recent really fascinating article, I think, on the cover of the Globe about 2 schools and how they teach about systemic racism or not. And so I think it's really important, Mayor, that we also uplift, you know, when we as women of color or people of color, I look at the sheriff and the sheriff's executive team, it's incredibly diverse, right? I look at what you've done in your first term as a mayor, and the people you've put in powerful positions, decision-making, policy-making positions. I am tired, Byron, of hearing my peers who have had 10 years, multiple terms, no secretaries of color, no people of color aside from, you know, chief of diversity, and they have no other people of color in leadership positions. I, within the first 12 months of my job, went from 11 all-white senior executive staff that were very smart. Some of them moved on their own, other ones were shuffled about, but I now have over 55% women, 55% people of color. I have Black men in leadership because they are the most often people touched by our criminal legal system. I have Black women in leadership because don't forget Breonna Taylor and all of us, that when there's mass incarceration, who's home taking care of these families? Who's accepting those exorbitant calls from prisons and jails? Who's putting food on the table and being an activist, et cetera? So I think, though, Byron, I want your viewership or mayor to hear that's an example of systemic racism that impacts you. And we are in a crisis now. We don't have time for you to be putting your, you know, what are they called when you ride a bike? Training wheels on and whoa, this is scary for me. Catch up. we're moving at 100 miles an hour and nobody's waiting for you. The world is real. Everyone doesn't get a trophy for being a participant. This is real life. Catch up now. It's your responsibility.
You know, that you reminded me of something when you're talking about training wheels. I remember as a kid reading in an Ebony magazine, every once in a while they would have these surveys from basically for white people. Do you think black people are moving too fast? Do you think black people are moving too slow or just about right? And that just stuck with me because of the nerve. I mean, moving too fast. People say, well, it takes time. It takes time. 401 years. Well, you know, I don't want my rights next week. I want them right now. Now, I'd like to move along to Floreisha Bastien, our youngster on the panel today. Floreisha, you are the folks, you young people are the ones who have really been out there, you know, pushing this as, and all generations, it's usually the young people who do it. Why do you think young people, and many white people, have chosen this moment to take a stand against racism?
I just wanted to say thank you for allowing me to be on this panel. I'm so honored by all the amazing people I've heard talk. I'm so moved. I think, you know, Black students and white people have taken on this stand is because we just can't sit down and not say anything anymore. Silence is not an option, and it's outrageous for Black people to continue with this fight. We've been going off this fight for over 400 years, and especially students, we receive a lot of heat, you know, going to these, you know, PWIs, and we want to talk out, we want to march, we want to fight for our people because our ancestors have, MLK did, and we need to fight for what's right, and we want to speak on it.
What do you see? What do you think the young people see that maybe some of the adults aren't seeing?
I think the kids, well, me and a lot of people my age are seeing that people of color have just been dealing with discrimination and injustice for too long, and we're in the heat of it. We experience it. Like, I'm Black, I experience stuff, and especially I'm a Black woman. I experience stuff that you cannot relate to, and things that we're not going to be like, oh, okay, sit down and be okay about it. We're going to fight about it and do things that we need to in order to make changes.
Somerville School Committee member Andre Green. Let's talk a little bit about systemic racism, how it impacts our education system. I remember being in first grade, I think maybe first grade, being like one of the only, probably the only Black kid in class. Maybe there was one other. The first time we were reading about the subject of slavery came up. Now I'm a first grader, remember, I'm just a kid, I'm a Black kid in this class. Suddenly all the eyes in the class turned to me, and I look up and everybody's staring at me. Going through school, that's about, we didn't get very much. As an adult, I've had to go back and read about Black American history because it wasn't taught in the schools. But I bring that point up because white parents, can you imagine something like that happening to your child in the schoolroom? A first grader, you know, going through that. And this is something that's in our society, it's in our blood. When I say in our blood, I meant as a society, as an American society. Andre Green, talk to me about systemic racism and our education system.
I don't even know where to begin. First, I want to, I want to thank my colleagues in government here. It is genuinely humbling to be with such powerhouses, such personal and professional heroes of mine. I always want to start with the story of Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa was an emperor of Mali who is not a household name. I guarantee 90% of people listening to this call right now never heard of him. Mansa Musa was one of, if not the richest person in the history of humanity. Man, so rich that when he traveled through Cairo on a pilgrimage to Mecca, he caused a depression because of all the gold he gave away, led to hyperinflation in Cairo. These are our people, our ancestors as Black people, and they aren't taught to us in schools. That's just one concrete example of the history that has been stolen from us. And I would say stolen from us because that's the other thing I always like to talk about, right? You hear about Black names, and we know the studies that say people with Black names are less likely to get interviews when they do resumes, which is another sign of systemic racism. We don't talk about why Black names are a thing, why the tradition from the 60s onward of giving Black people creating names happened. It happened because our very history was stolen from us. We don't have ancestral names, right? If I do Ancestry.com, as I did, I get this vague sense that 40% of my people came from somewhere in West Africa, but we don't know where. My family history starts in 1910. That's the history we aren't taught. And you're right, white people wouldn't stand for this, right? We know this because white people, when given the option, don't choose to send their kids to Black schools, right? Segregation in America still happens because that's what white people want. And right here in Massachusetts, we can see how it plays out. We can look at two communities, Chelsea and Brookline, that are 8 miles apart. And Brookline spends $50 million a year more on its schools than Chelsea does. And that leads to a vicious cycle, right? Brookline has good schools, which means that the property values in Brookline go up. And, sorry, I'm trying to be efficient with my laptop mouse here. Because the property values in Brookline go up, they get richer. And in Chelsea, they get poorer. And this means that their schools get more under-resourced, and Brookline schools get more over-resourced. And that means that those 70% of Chelsea students who are Black and brown continue generationally to have worse schools. And we can't fix that until white people, and I want to be clear on this, until rich white people in the suburbs are willing to fund our schools the way they fund their own schools. We see this time and time again, that the schools that white people send their kids to do not look like the schools Black people do.
You know, Andre, you reminded me, all of this reminds me of so many things coming up, being in middle school and getting an assignment from a white history teacher about what country I came from, and I went home scratching my head. My mother told me, she said, just tell him he came from the South. He's a history teacher, he'll know what that means. But it also reminds me of a little running joke I have with one of my colleagues at work. I guess I could say his name because we've talked about this before, Jonathan Hall, whose ancestors came over here on the Mayflower. And I tell Jonathan, we joke around about this. I kind of rib Jonathan. I say, gosh, Jonathan, you know, my family tree goes back to, on my mother's side, you know, it stops, you know, because my great-grandparents were sold away as slaves. My father's side goes back to about 1820, then it just stops because we were just property. Gee whiz, I wonder whose ancestors came over first, yours or mine? I guess we'll never know, will we? So anyhow, that's what it reminded me of. So let's move on to City Councilor Will.
One second, I just want to ask you a question because you said something in your remarks that triggered something for me. I was also the one Black kid in my school or my class in school.
Okay.
And so did you get the experience of your entire childhood being told, A, you were either acting white or having your white friends tell you, oh, I don't really think of you as Black? Oh,
yes, I've heard that, yes. And in college, oh, how articulate I was, you know. Yes, I've got all. I've heard it all. You know, I've heard it all.
But Byron, can I add one thing though about systems in Chelsea that the school committee person mentioned? Chelsea, in addition to not getting money for its school system, and Chelsea is of course part of Suffolk County, also has the Tobin Bridge going over it, Logan Airport flying through it, and the largest private food distribution center in the United States of America. And some of you might think, oh, that's great. They can fly to wherever the hell they're originally from and drive. No, those are toxins, right? You know what Winchester doesn't have? A huge bridge going through it and planes. I know they're annoyed because planes are flying 4 miles above them. And I used to work at Massport, by the way. Chelsea literally has planes flying down the middle of Chelsea, right? Dropping toxins and rocking houses. It also happens to be the #1 place of the 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts, #1 in COVID-19. Complete disparities based on approximately 67% Latinx and a huge immigrant population. But those are examples of systems. Environmental racism is very real as well, because you know what poor people don't have time to do because they're busy trying to live and not be killed and just make it to the following day, is show up at public hearings about whether a bridge is going to be built through their town, or an airport is going to divert all their planes off of runway whatever to go through their town as opposed to somewhere else. Thank you.
I'm quite aware of that because I've done stories on it. Somerville City Councilor Mbah, kind of dovetailing off of that, how do you see systemic racism impacting other aspects of our society, like health, as Rachel Rollins mentioned, and housing? These are issues that you have to deal with as a city councilor.
Thank you, Byron, and thank you also for all these prolific colleagues of mine. It's really an honor to be part of this conversation. Before I respond to your question about housing and health, I just want to give some context also about myself and how I interplay with these issues. So like you rightly said in the beginning, I was born and raised in Cameroon, and Cameroon is divided into French-speaking majority and an English-speaking minority. So growing up in the English-speaking minority, I experienced a kind of racism and discrimination. And we all are Black people there. So living in Sweden and then the US, I experienced some ordinary person-to-person racism. So I've learned that racism can exist in any society, and that denial only makes it worse. So here in America, we understand the direct person-to-person racism, but we have been denying structural racism for far too long. We are now in a moment of reckoning, like most of my colleagues have said, of focus and attention. And it's important that we don't miss this opportunity to make progress. Because racism on itself is properly defined by the unequal outcomes it produces in all facets of our lives. Once we understand racism that way, it becomes visible and it's easier to talk about. So racism is not an event, it is a structure that we inhabit. And just to put more context, I look at the wealth gap in 2015 in the study called The Color of Wealth by the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, estimated that white households' net worth in Greater Boston averages about $250,000, while Black household net worth averages around $8.
Okay, we have some audio problems there. We'll have to come back. We'll come back.
Oh, sorry about that. Oh, what happened? Oh, I'm sorry. Like, I don't know what happened.
That's the world we're living right now.
Yeah, so I was giving the context about, like the wealth gap.
Yes, we got that statistic.
Okay.
We heard the statistic and then you got muted. Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you. So I just wanted to say that this is a product of structural racism that goes back centuries. And so without access, first of all, to black power, we will continue to struggle, to change the racist policies that keep us down. And like most of my colleagues have said, it's a vicious cycle and deeply unfair. Our entire country suffers from this degraded relationship, and we need to come together to make, enormous changes. Now you're talking about, before I even go further to talk about like the health disparity, I have a personal story related to that. But so in the beginning, when I came here as a legal permanent resident, I applied for Mass Health. I was rejected because they said I wasn't below 21 and I didn't have a dependent. And so you can imagine a system like this being created in such a way that just disproportionately impact, like marginalized community. And look at the COVID. COVID has really exposed the entire system of how broken it is. Housing. Housing, it's something that there's a lot of discrimination in housing, going back to redlining in the 50s. There's a lot of lack of Black ownership, very depressing. I just mentioned the well gas, affordable housing, in our community, just environmental justice with housing. If you look at the people, highways, those are people of color, black people. They keep marginalized, sending them in those areas. So we need to become, like better anti-racist, as defined by Ibram Kendi. That means that clearly identifying racist ideas and policies and acting on doing them. We need to understand that everything that we do has racist implications. And our local budgets are racist because they perpetuate a racist status quo that produces unequal outcomes by race over and over again, year after year, generation after generation.
Okay, all right.
Byron, before you go,
Steve.
ask a quick question. I want to basically with the Congresswoman, but anybody can jump in here. This morning I saw an interview on one of the news networks with Bob Johnson, the founder of the Black Entertainment Network. And he's pushing this initiative to have a black political party, His thesis is that the Democratic Party really doesn't embrace us the way that they should. The Republican Party does not even want us. And with the wealth of influence that we have, the wealth of money that we spend in this country, and the things that we can get done as a race of people, his thought is that why deal with the Democrats or the Republicans? Have our own party, run our own candidates. And I thought that was very interesting. And so I wanted to ask you, Congresswoman, I mean, what do you make? Is it feasible? Does it make sense? Could it happen?
Well, it reminds me of the words of the director, Reginald Hudlin, director of many iconic Black films. And he said, we have to do more than fight the power. We have to be the power. And so I think, in this moment, as I said, we are witnessing a culture shift, but we need a power shift. And so I certainly, I think everything is on the table, because in this moment we are reimagining. How do we realize a true power shift? And the point that I was making earlier is, listen, I'm a proud Democrat, but the point that I was making is that I just don't want us to let anyone off the hook and let us think that this system and structural racism is only preserved by bigoted white folks being complicit in their silence, or in actively perpetuating those systems, or that we put all of that on my colleagues across the aisle, So that was really just the point that I was making earlier, that there's a lot of blame to go around, but, many hands make for light work. And so as tempting as it is to throw our hands up, I'm encouraged in this moment that people are extending their hands and want to do that work.
Well, if we have a Black party, I'll you for president. I'm just...
one thing that's...
Steve's starting stuff. Is this open to the press? I love him. That's our brother.
One of the things, I think, dovetailing off that, there have been a number of pieces written about this, opinion pieces, news pieces recently about corporate America. The headline has been the same in the several pieces. Has corporate America failed Black America? What does anybody want to say about that? I'll throw that out there.
Yeah. Andre wanted to say something.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to this idea of a Black party, and actually dovetails nicely with the whole corporate thing as well. Because of course corporate America's failed us, just like political America's failed us. America has failed us.
That's right.
But I think, as tempting as it might be to throw our hands up and pull away, it's not feasible, right? Like I represent a ward that is 30% non-white. If I only represented those non-white people, I wouldn't be in the seat. But conversely, and speaking to, again, Congresswoman's great point, this is not a them problem, it's an us problem. Somerville is one third people of color. Somerville in 2016 voted 91% in favor of Hillary Clinton. Somerville has had, in the history of its as a city, 4 elected officials of color. And if we're not talking about power, we're not talking about that kind of representation, we're not talking about equity. Massachusetts schools are 35% Black and brown. Of the roughly 2,000 school committee members in Massachusetts, we estimate that under 50 of them are people of color. So if we're not actually talking about how we get Black and brown people in positions of power, we're not talking about equity, we're not talking about how we make the world a more just place.
I'm going to come back to that question about corporate power, but I wanted to raise something with Mayor Curtatone, Joe Curtatone of Somerville. Mayor, you've recently made history by becoming the first mayor in the Commonwealth, maybe even in the country, to declare racism a public health and safety emergency. What does that mean?
Well, thanks. So many, I think all of the people on this call have alluded or spoken directly to this. So I'm a policymaker on the local level. And in all our roles, in my position of privilege and power, I help guide policy and decisions that impact people's lives in so many areas. Your access to housing, policy around the environment, mobility, education, public health. We know that racism is a social determinant of health. And we know that systemic racism obviously causes persistent racial discrimination in so many areas of our lives, as has been spoken to here. Whether or not just whether we have affordable housing, whether it's actually affordable, where we build our highway systems, the impact of pollution on Black and brown people, in our schools, access to healthcare. So as Mayor Spicer mentioned, and Framingham's done the same, and I commend her for her leadership, and Bastien has followed, this is a starting point to understand that this is part of a deep-rooted problem in the system, which for hundreds of years, we have allowed to compound and worsen a system that oppresses Black and brown people. So it's important that we look at it through that lens, because racism just doesn't exist in policing or what you see, and it manifested in the killings of George Floyd and so many others, but in every system that we have control of. And we can influence that system so we can bring actual equity and justice and remove disparity from it. It's been played out, as been mentioned by others, in the COVID-19 crisis, right? The pandemic, killing of George Floyd, exposing the racism in policing, an economic recession is a perfect storm of collision. Who is getting sicker and dying at higher rates, Black and brown people, than me? Who is going back to work sooner, forced because they had no choice, they need to put food back on the table, and exposing themselves and their family to great health risks because they don't work those white collar jobs and can work virtually. It's Black and brown people. They're essential workers to me and to people like me. Which is why we need to understand that this sets the frame, as this is a public health crisis, sets a frame for more bolder intervention and sustained intervention. I want to add one other thing, because Congresswoman Pressley said something that's important, not letting us off the hook. White Americans cannot be let off the hook here. We cannot be allowed to sit back in our chair comfortably in sort of in a self-congratulatory sort of way, said, I've done something progressive and it's good, although it might be good. And not be in charge to do the necessary work, the long systemic work that needs to happen, because when it comes to being champions of progressive issues, we cannot just do that one thing or address this issue, for example, around use of force and policing, but allow a system to remain in place that continues to run roughshod over Black and brown people. Again, this is really the motivation around declaring racism a public health crisis, because it is.
We talk a little bit about policing. We can't spend the whole time talking about policing, because as much as it has been on our radar with the killing of George Floyd and so many others, we all know that the policing, that's a symptom. It's not the illness. It's a symptom. However, this whole concept of qualified immunity that everyone's talking about for police officers. A lot of police officers are reacting to the charging of some of their colleagues for some of these murders in a negative way. Maybe you could start with this one, Mayor Spicer. Dealing with the police, what is qualified immunity for some people who may not know what that is? And I know you have people in your town, residents, who are trying to push you into taking police out of the schools. So let's hear from you about the whole thing, the subject of qualified immunity, what it means for policing and where you see policing going.
You know, first of all, I'd like to see policing, as our Congresswoman alluded to, revisioned in a way that their role is to not just to protect and serve, but to serve and protect. And the service piece is put first and foremost. And within, you know, the notion of police in schools, this is a new paradigm, because as a former teacher and administrator in a high school, we never had police officers in the schools. We had teachers that engage with our students and also dealt with the discipline of our students. I think we put police in a very tough position, and you know, and I concur. They've had to take on roles of being social workers and dealing with things that are not necessarily crimes at that point, that, you know, and they've been put in those places. I think we need to reshape what we think about policing. I also think there needs to be greater conversation about the role and the respect and clarity in the community about the roles and responsibilities of police officers. So similarly to an executive order around racism being a health crisis, I also issued an executive order on the use of force and collaboration with our police chief, because once again, it is about the relationship building. It's about the things we put in place in our community in order to make sure people understand how they're made to feel safe, but also how the practices and of the police department are happening in those communities and making them explicit. That's the other thing, and having that opportunity to have a conversation, to keep having the conversations, because that's where I think this breaks down, is that there is a breakdown in the conversations and the practices that build a better community. And when you say looking at ways in which police officers are giving immunity, I think it's important to hold people accountable for bad behavior, and that's internally as well as externally.
Byron, I want the DA to get in, and she might do it too, she's a student of history, but I just want to give the historical context on QI, on qualified immunity, but please, I want to defer to the DA.
No, go.
Or the sheriff
You proposed. I'll talk about it after you're done.
Okay, Congresswoman Pressley, you go first.
Okay, so the right to sue state and local officials, including police, is a Reconstruction era law passed to protect Black folks in the South who were experiencing significant backlash to the rights recently established in the 14th Amendment. So the legislation establishing this right, the Civil Rights Act of 1871, was also known as the Ku Klux Klan Act, a testament to the fact that these protections were a direct response to rampant white supremacist violence against Black people simply existing and exercising our rights. So eliminating qualified immunity is important now, but it's important to every moment where Black folks feel the law's punishment before they ever do its protection. For as long as we are in this skin, we will never be perceived as unarmed. That's the reality. And so if people believe that Black lives matter, then that means justice for the Black lives that we've been robbed of matters. So QI is a protection invented by the Supreme Court, expanded in court case after court case, particularly in cases of excessive use of force. And then again, I've already given the historical context, but that's why we need to end qualified immunity. And this is actually the first tripartisan bill introduced in the history of Congress. It's myself, Representative Justin Amash, who's an independent, and then Representative McClintock, who's a Republican.
And remember, Byron, so for me, just recognize we have a rogue police officer that engages in excessive force. Years down the line, either the state court or the federal court in a 1983 claim that is filed by the individual that was harmed or the family that's left surviving after a death or a murder. Let's say $7.3 million verdict comes down. That's Mayor Spicer and Mayor Curtatone that is responsible for that payment. And I think at the very least, forget about qualified immunity. I think if those mayors said to their chiefs or commissioners, hey, That $7.9 million is coming off of your $414 million budget, and you need to make do with what you have, because I'm not taking this hit for that bad police officer who's still on your force and you never fired. I think we'd see a change in behavior. Or similarly, if that police officer could be held, she or he, responsible personally, and a lien was on their house for some behavior that was outside of the scope of their duties. I mean, there are lots of protections built in there. This isn't just Sheriff Tompkins gets to sue every person in the Somerville Police Department tomorrow because he wants to, if we look at qualified immunity differently. But I would like to say about policing, Byron, I'm really proud. I think we're the first in the nation. I drafted a letter to all of my police chiefs and the commissioner. In Suffolk County, I'm fortunate to have the colonel of the state police, the Bastien commissioner, Chelsea, Winthrop, and Revere police chiefs, as well as the transit police. And my Chelsea and Revere chiefs are also presidents of two of the largest police unions in Massachusetts. And I told them we were going to sit down together and have a very honest, open discussion about race policing in the Black community. And we did that last Thursday. The meeting was supposed to be an hour. It was over 2 hours long, incredibly emotional. We have a press release that's going out today, and they are not happy with some of the statements I have made, not only as the district attorney generally, but certainly in the aftermath of George Floyd, and as a very proud Black person. And I don't get to take this skin off at the end of the day, and even if I did, I wouldn't. But my point is we are sitting down and talking, because you can't just be mad at the police about the outcry of what we're seeing in this country. DAs are failing just as much, if not more. No, we aren't killing people, but we are willfully looking the other way when it happens and not prosecuting. And I will own that. It's why I ran for my office. Ahmaud Arbery, Byron, who happened before George Floyd, he was murdered February 23rd. We didn't learn about it until May, because the Glynn County Police Department down in Georgia didn't want us to learn about it. 3 DAs watched that video and said, nope, Georgia has a citizens arrest statute. That looks fine. We're not going to prosecute. It was not until the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the state version of the FBI, swooped in and saw that, and within 24 hours charged the McMichaels with felony murder. DAs are failing across the country. We need to vote out the ones that are awful. And remember, we're elected. Police commissioners and chiefs aren't. Mayors are. They get to appoint them. But DAs are failing just as much as police.
You know, that killing you talked about in Georgia, that it took so long for any charges, that was basically, there was no outrage until everyone saw the video. Now, I think back when I was a kid, the civil rights movement really heated up in the 60s when white people saw on TV for the first time those dogs and the billy clubs and the fire hoses down south. And then they got involved, and the needle was moved.
Or Emmett Till's open casket, right? There were these seminal moments, or the Rodney King beating on March 3rd, 1991.
That's right. His mother, Emmett Till's mother, wanted the world to see what they had done to her baby. Yep. And look at today. Fast forward to today. I've been covering these killings for decades. They go back to just, another brother getting, gunned down by the police. Oh, it's justified. Nothing happens. Now there's all this technology, all these phones, these cell phones. People, it's like, I think the President Obama said, people can see it. We're not making this stuff up. It's really happening. And I'd like to hear a little bit more from Floreisha, Bastien, just about what you'd like to say as a young person to this older generation, and that you're trying to change.
Yeah, I'm here. I would like to say that, the thing is that so many Black leaders in the past have done so much for the Black community, and it almost feels like all their work had just gone down in vain, gone down in the drain. And, us Black leaders today, we want to continue that moment, that fight, because you can't deny what you see on a video. silence speaks volumes. We can't just sit here in silence and not do anything. And so we want to continue that work, and we want to fight harder, and we want to fight for you and with you to dismantle all these racist institutions.
Okay, all right. You know, the term Black Lives Matter, I think that was coined about 7 or 8 years ago. And when I first heard it, I knew exactly what it meant, but it really offended a lot of white people. It really offended a lot of white people. I guess obviously a lot of white people, young white people, have embraced that term now. What are anyone's thoughts on that? On just the term Black Lives Matter, and what a lightning rod it was just a few years ago, and how that's changed now.
Well, let me jump in here on this one. So Black Lives Matter is one of those monikers, one of those statements, one of those defining moments that changes or will be instrumental in changing culture. When it first came out, people didn't want to embrace it. When Colin Kaepernick took a knee, people didn't want to embrace it. They wanted to say that this was an affront against the flag when they knew better, and it wasn't. So Black Lives Matter is now morphed from the killing of Black men, Black and brown men, to all of the tattered social infrastructure that this country has. When you talk about housing and transportation and education and jobs, job training, criminal justice, Black Lives Matter now stands on that vanguard, on that forefront, to say that this really has to change. And when you say white people are embracing it, when Confederate statues are coming down, when you have a NASCAR driver putting Black Lives Matter on his car that is going to go around that track for hours, you need to hear a message 9 or 10 times before it begins to sink in. And so that Black Lives Matter message has been used so much now that it's really seeping into our environment and our culture on a wide array of issues. And I think that's going to be part of the systemic change that's what's beginning to take place and will continue to take place because of that. And before I stop on this to go to the next person about Black Lives Matter, just let me say something about the police real quick. We need to have police that look more like the communities that they're representing. We need more Black and brown and female police. We need to look at how police are brought into the academy and what they're trained on when they're brought into the academy. And we need to say, look, it's great that you have a veterans preference and the like. Well, do the veterans preference this year and do something next year that's different, that allows more people of different hues to get into policing. Until we begin to have a policing cadre that is reflective of the Roxbury, Mattapans, Dorchesters, we're going to continue to have these problems. And so we really do need to look at who's becoming police. And I think someone on the call mentioned, we don't need to bring in more G.I. Joes and G.I. Janes to be police. We need to bring in more psychologists and sociologists and people that understand the mental makeup of a person's mind, so that when you do have these problems, when people are suffering mentally or otherwise, you have people that are understanding of that and not just trying to be punitive.
You know,
And
Steve,
if I could, I'm sorry, just really quickly.
Okay, go
With
ahead.
veterans preference, remember, and my father is a veteran, it's important, but you're taking them out of a war-torn, like, combat situation and then bringing them back to a community where they're supposed to community police, right? We are failing our veterans as well with respect to not giving them the treatment and services they need, about potentially having PTSD and other things that they didn't have before they went to go serve in our country honorably and with dignity. But you know, what I find interesting is when we talk about policing, a real good example is when we see a George Floyd unarmed, murdered for less than $20 or counterfeit $20 bill, but then we see a Dylan Roof, a white man who murdered 9 people in a church, and the police can gently escort him, you know, to a car. He's not killed. We know he killed 9 people. He's hungry. They can bring him to a fast food restaurant before they drop him off. It's that type of outlandish behavior. And I get it. Police in Boston are saying, well, we didn't drive Gillen Roof. Yeah, I get it, you didn't. But you're also silent about how outrageous those things are. And right now, silence is assent. So we need people, to me, Byron, if Ben and Jerry's can make a statement about Black Lives Matter and George Floyd's death, if Zappos, when I go to buy wonderful shoes, I can see their Black Lives Matter statement, or McDonald's can tell me as I'm getting fries that Black Lives Matter, I think our police associations and detectives associations and other organizations should be screaming it out loud or saying, we stand with you, community. Their silence is deafening, and that's what I'm talking about when I call them about it.
You know, I'm told this is going to be a big fight coming up with the whole police licensing bill. That's not all going to be finished at the end of the year, but this whole veterans preference, which is in civil service, I'm told by a number of folks who are going to be involved in this in the Black and Latino caucus, that this is going to be a big fight. A few years ago, I was sat on a panel with a white police chief who brought this up. You know, he said when he started out policing many years ago, you were evaluated on how many arrests you made. He said, now we're not like that anymore. We don't do that. He said, and I have all these veterans coming back from war. They get put to the top of the list, and I don't need cowboys out there. I need people who can work in the community. But you know, that's just the way it is.
But
so
Byron, could I also say that they're also being given military grade equipment. How can you give people military grade equipment that is being transferred from our military to police? If you're going to arm people for war, they're going to go into community like they are at war. So that is something that the Congressional Black Caucus has introduced, the Justice and Policing Act, and my People's Justice Guarantee calls for to stop the militarization of our police force and to stop transferring that military grade equipment. I just want to say something to Floreisha, because I know I have to leave soon, but you know, you are just continuing the long tradition of young Black activist leadership. And buckle up, okay? Because the work of justice is not linear and it is long. And I'm going to give you some data points. Birmingham, 37 days. The Greensboro sit-ins, 6 months. The Freedom Rides, 7 months. The Montgomery bus boycott, 382 days. And all of that, because there's a documentary coming out, and I was very honored to contribute to it, honoring John Lewis as one of the original architects of the movement. And we need to honor that blueprint. It's organizing and mobilizing for law change. That is how we got the Civil Rights Act. That is how we got the Voting Rights Act. That's how we will see law change. And Byron, to your point around corporate boards, we've been giving folks a pass. We have our biggest sectors here is financial services. And we have a huge corporate community here. And they'll make a contribution to like the Little League. And we think that's really enough. No, how many Black people have equity in your business? How many Black people are on your board? Show me your top 10 leadership positions. And how many of them are Black, and are they being paid comparable to their white peers? What is your succession plan for when you leave, and will there be a Black person in that position? That is what we're talking about. If you believe Black lives matter, then Black data matters, Black research matters. How can we be in the healthcare mecca of Massachusetts and Black women still be 4 times more likely to die in childbirth? And I just want you all to know, who think, because you try to blame us for everything. This has nothing to do with education level or socioeconomic status or data. This is about embedded bias in our healthcare system that
Serena Williams. It happened to Serena Williams.
That delegitimizes Black pain. So if you believe Black lives matter, then Black power matters, Black leadership matters, Black data matters, Black home ownership matters, Black students matter, Black
secretaries
matters. It all matters. And the last thing I'll give as an example, because I'm introducing a bill this week called the Freedom to Move. Ain't that something? But transportation justice is a major issue. And the fact that Black Boston riders, according to the Livable Streets report, bus riders, ride an extra 64 hours a year, waiting, riding, transferring, That's about connectivity to a doctor's appointment, to your job, to your school. So that's what we mean when we say it's systemic, it's structural. It's not one-off. Everyone will say, but I'm not a racist. That's not enough. So I'll just end there.
That's what they're also, they say, it's not me, it's not me, it's not me. No one is saying it's you, it's the system which
you benefit from. You benefit from. Or just, and to piggyback on what our fabulous Congresswoman said, even look at Grove Hall, right? The ATMs there run out of money all the time. If that happened in West Roxbury, there'd be a call made immediately, and Bank of America would, they'd be Tokyo drifting into West Roxbury to make sure there were $20 bills for all the people that needed to get their money. We are just treated poorly overall, right? I will add, with community policing, it's no different than when I was at a major law firm and they had a head of diversity, right? I need to give a shout out to my old boss, Tom Glenn, the CEO of Massport, who was the architect of when we did the headquarters hotel. He allowed us to have like racial and gender equity as an equally weighted criteria for determining who was going to get this bid. Equally weighted of 4, right? So 24% to your racial and gender equity on your team, and not just who was slinging hammers. I'm talking about the money that went into this, hundreds of millions of dollar property increase. And I was proud to be the chief legal counsel, not the chief legal counsel of Black issues at Massport, the chief legal counsel of Massport, which Tom put me in that position. What I can say is we need in our corporate boards, in our Fortune 100 companies, all of these diversity people that you have, if they're not on your executive team, you're paying us lip service, right? Just like with the police, Nora Bastien is a superintendent. She is phenomenal. I want her on the executive team when we're getting complaints about the Youth and Violence Task Force or the other groups that go out in the middle of the night and interact with our communities. She needs to be involved with those complaints that happen. I want her involved in internal affairs. I want her involved in anti-corruption and all of the complaints that come in from the community. I don't just want her playing basketball and handing out ice cream. 2 things that I love very much and I'm very good at doing: eating ice cream, playing basketball. Byron, I will beat you. I'm telling you right now. But I'm telling you this, we have to have her in the right rooms, okay? Go ahead.
I see you didn't take on Floreisha though.
No, I know Floreisha might have me a little bit. She's younger than me. She's younger than me.
She got them young legs. She got them young legs.
Byron, can I make a comment? Because we have
very quick, because I'm about to wrap up.
We have a lot of allies, that want to know how they can be allies. So I just want to say, people with privilege, overwhelmingly white today, have more access to power, just by definition. So they can use that privilege to demand change. Politicians have to respond, as they know that they'll be voted out of office if they don't. So the policy changes, need to be informed by the people most impacted by racism, Black members.
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up there. We're going to go. I just wanted to say one little tiny thing about Black Lives Matter. There was people who were so upset when this term came out, but it made perfect sense to me. Everyone said, people were countered by saying all lives matter. Well, we've always known that other lives matter, that white lives matter. That hasn't been a question. That's not what was in question, whether white lives matter. We've all known that. I mean, look who runs the country. The question is, do Black lives matter? Finally, I'm just going to have our host wrap this up. Mayor Curtatone, your final thoughts on anything you want to say. Thank you for putting all this together. We're coming to our end here. And just really, what remaining thoughts do you have that you would like to give us?
First, Byron, thank you for hosting, and thanks for all the panelists for joining. Floreisha, thank you for your leadership. And please, it's not a case we need you in the political process. We need your ideals. We really do. So keep at it. And I just want to say, as as a white people, white America is uncomfortable right now, and we should be made to be uncomfortable. And I remember when we first hung the Black Lives Matter banner several years ago in City Hall, We had a lot of this conversation. I since then have learned a lot. It's about really doing the work. Again, get away from being self-congratulatory and owning the work. I thank you for all of that, for educating me on that. But I'd say to people like me, people who are white and privileged and are in positions of power, we're really going to be a country that is compassionate, that is civil, diverse, and that is equally opportunistic for everyone, no matter what their race is. Then we need to question our own personal prejudices and our own problematic beliefs. I'm ready with all of you to own that work, and I ask everyone else, part of white America, to own that work with us. We will be a great nation when that happens.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Somerville Mayor Joe Curtatone, and also Denise Taylor and Natasha Perez and their entire team for putting this panel together.
Yeah.
Thank you all. That will do it for us here. Thank the panelists for participating. It's been a great discussion. And thank everyone out there for watching. That will do it. It wraps things up here. And I'd just like to say, keep the conversation going. Have a great
Thank you, Byron.
Great job.
Thank
Great
you.
job,
Thank you,
Well done,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.